My name is Adrian, and I want to share with you these very macabre paranormal experiences that happened to me when I worked as a guard at a high school in the United States. That was my first job in this country. I was born here, but I had been in Mexico all my life. My parents are Mexican, as is my entire family, but the situation was very difficult in terms of the economy. So I made the decision to come here. I've been here for more than 6 years now, but what happened to me at that school made me think a lot about whether to return to my country or not. My job was at night. I had to watch out that no one broke into the school. In the area where I was, there were a lot of gangs, and on many occasions they had broken in to consume substances and left certain areas in a mess. I'll tell you in advance that I only lasted a week at that job. The first night I showed up to work, I felt something strange. When I entered the facilities completely alone in silence, I felt a strange vibe, but I thought it was because I was new. I had never worked at night. In any case, I was a bit worried about the situation. I entered the room where I was supposed to be watching the cameras and settled in at around 12 at night. I saw through one of the cameras in a hallway how the door of a classroom opened by itself. You could see a little inside, and you could see how a bench had turned over as if someone had pushed it so hard that it fell to one side. I checked all the cameras to see if someone had gotten in, but no one appeared on any of the cameras. My job was to go check who had caused the bench to fall and the door to open. Well, in the classrooms, there were no cameras. Honestly, yes, I felt scared, although my fear up to that moment was more inclined to the fact that there were street youth there. I was not armed enough to confront them, and they became aggressive. But when I got to that classroom that was on the second floor, I noticed that there was no one in the place. I checked the windows and they were all padlocked. I lifted the bench and left there, closing the door. But when I was moving away to go down the stairs, I heard very clearly some laughter. I turned around suddenly and asked, "Who was there?" But no one answered. The closer I got to that room, the more I realized that was where the laughter was coming from. So I pushed the door open, but again, I realized that there was no one inside the room. The laughter stopped when I opened the door. I checked the rooms next door, but they were also empty. All had their windows closed with a padlock. I even went into the bathroom to check, but everything was completely empty. I felt very scared, but now it was the paranormal. I ran down and locked myself in the camera room again. I already felt a very negative vibe run through my body, but I did not want an arm suggestion. So I did not give more thought to what had happened. I made myself a coffee and tried to relax. But at about 2 in the morning, I saw something on a camera that really left me aside. The body was the same camera that captured what happened in the room, but it was not a person. More rather, it was like a silhouette that had no shape of anything. When I turned to see the next camera, what is it after that one towards where this silhouette was advancing suddenly disappeared. At that point, I was already quite uneasy, but the thing had just begun. After a few minutes, someone knocked on my office door. I jumped out of my seat because I was very scared when I heard that. I did not go out immediately. I did not even bother to ask who it was because I knew it was nobody to enter the small hallway where the camera room was. You need a code that only the guards had, and from the cameras I could see that that door would be closed. Nobody had entered there except for me. I was very nervous, so to calm down, I called my best friend who was still in Mexico, who was the only one who could be awake at that time. I told him everything that had happened, and he made fun of me because at first he thought I was joking with him. But when I let him know that it was not a joke and that all that had really happened, he got worried and started looking on the internet about that school to investigate it. I just wanted to be talking to someone as much as I could so as not to feel alone. Although that was prohibited, they would have no way of knowing it. But what my friend found on the internet left me with a fear that I can't even describe. Celos read me the note of what had happened 3 years ago, and in short, a student came in armed and took the lives of 6 classmates in the classroom, and then he ended his life. Everything happened in that classroom where he was studying. Just remembering what I felt at that moment is as if I were living it again. It is a terrifying sensation, horrible vibes that I hope no one ever feels. But I had to continue working. I preferred to ask my friend not to read anything else to me. It would be better to talk to me about something else to distract me and make the night more pleasant. So we began to talk about other topics, Like that, a good while passed until it was 4 in the morning, and he told me that he was going to sleep because he couldn't stand sleep anymore. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for having accompanied me all that time. Then he hung up and I was left alone. Knew after a few minutes, I heard a very loud bang, but I didn't know where it came from because when I checked the cameras, I didn't know anything at all. I had to go out and investigate again, opening classroom by classroom, starting on the ground floor. But as I walked, I heard footsteps on the upper floor running. So, I quickly went up the stairs, but there was no one in the classrooms or bathrooms either. And that's how my first shift ended. Finally, it dawned and people started to arrive. The director asked me how my first day had gone. And I answered, well, I wasn't going to tell her everything that happened. Even so, I really needed the job. I went to my godfather's house with whom I was living. I slept all day until nightfall, and I had to get ready to return to that school. I was so nervous that I can't explain it to you, but even so, I showed up on time. I arrived and locked myself in the camera room, and I'm not lying to you. Exactly the same thing happened as the night before. Noises of all kinds in the hallways. The camera captured it again, like the door of that classroom opened and closed by itself like 3 times in a row without anyone manipulating it. This time, it even touched me just when I was watching a hallway camera, like a locker slammed its door very hard, and at the same time I heard the noise. There was no doubt that after that tragedy, the school at night had ghosts, souls in pain, or whatever you want to call them. There were bad things there. There was no doubt about it because it was felt in the environment. I told them that I spent a week going to work in that place, but every day something similar to everything I have told you happened. I did not even bother to go out to find out who it was because I knew it was no one alive. But the last day, the straw that broke the camel's back and that made me literally run out of there was that night when I arrived to work. There was a youth party in a house in front of the school. I mistakenly thought that the night would be more pleasant because there were people outside, and I would feel more accompanied. But at about 2 in the morning, I started to hear how the young people who were at the party were yelling obscenities. I thought they were having a fight between them, but every time I heard their voices, it was closer to the school. So, I put the front camera and saw that they were literally outside the school on the sidewalk, yelling and looking up. So, I went out to see what was happening. When I left, I noticed that many of them were drunk, but some were in their right mind. I asked them what was happening. They couldn't be there and please leave. A young woman complained to me, who was that bastard who was watching them from the window upstairs from one of the classrooms at the school? I turned around, and I didn't see anyone. I told them that they were wrong, that the school was empty, and only I was there working. Afterwards, another young man told me that I wasn't doing my job right because when I was leaving, the person upstairs was already standing watching them. Then they showed me different photos where you could perfectly see that there was a person in that window, but that wasn't what bothered me the most. But when a young man who was already drunk showed me the photo closer up, that young man who was looking out had his face totally disfigured. Several people began to scream when they saw that photo. The young people also left, and some even laughed, saying the name of the young man who had perpetuated that tragedy. At that moment, I did not know how to act. I simply took my things and left. In the same way, I had already decided that I was going to resign, and that event confirmed my decision. On Monday, I went to submit my formal resignation because I could not fail at work since I needed to find another one, and I did not want to have bad references. I must say that the director of the school was very kind to me and confessed to me that she had lost count of how many guards had resigned from her. At first, she did not believe them because she called herself someone very religious and that she did not believe in ghosts, but that she was already beginning to doubt after so many guards who resigned for exactly the same thing. They could not stand everything that was happening there. Nights. This was my story, and I do not want to say goodbye without first telling you that I tell it with great respect for all those victims, not only of that school but of all the schools where something similar has happened. It really is something very sad and regrettable, but I do tell you one thing. That young man who caused so much evil is not resting in peace. He is still there, unable to transcend. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. I want to tell the true story that happened to me at a school where I worked years ago. I have been a high school teacher for 16 years, and in my entire career, I had never gone through something similar. That is why I want to share my experience. At that time, I had just moved to a new city. My husband was transferred at work, and my children and I went with him. I was hired as a teacher at a private high school in that city. I was very excited to start this new adventure. The first day, I showed up at the facilities already as a teacher to start teaching, but when I was walking through one of the steps, I saw a young man sitting on a bench. One who was outside the classroom kept looking at me a lot, but I noticed something strange, as if she was very sad or something similar. So, I smiled at her because she was looking at me, but she didn't smile back. I let her pass and entered my classroom. I introduced myself to my new students, and everything was very normal. But when I was finishing my first class of the day, I saw through one of the windows that same young man standing outside the patio looking into the classroom where I was. It was something that seemed very strange to me. All the students were in class. He was wearing the school uniform, that's why I knew he was the student there. Also, a young man from my class noticed that I was looking outside, so he also turned around to see what I was looking at so carefully, as if he didn't want his classmate to see. Anyway, the day went by completely normally. The next day when I arrived at school, I no longer saw that boy who looked at me with sad eyes. I went to give my classes, but at break time I needed to go to the bathroom. When I arrived, the cleaning lady told me that the entire floor was wet because there was a leak, but I could go to the bathroom of the other building. Those were in operation, so that's what I did. It's worth mentioning that that building was not in operation. They used it to store materials and things like that. I went in, and there were 2 students in the bathroom, but they were already leaving. I went into the stall to do my business, and then I heard someone else come in. Well, normally I thought it was another student who had also been sent here. I heard that she locked herself in the bathroom next door to where I was. But suddenly I saw this person's feet very close to the stall, and I saw that it was actually a boy because he was wearing men's shoes and school pants. I left the bathroom and knocked on the door. I told him that he couldn't be there because that was the women's bathroom. But then I heard that the young man began to cry. It was a very strange thing. I asked him his name and what was wrong with him, but the boy continued crying without saying anything. I didn't know what to do, and I left the bathroom very confused. As I was leaving at the bathroom door, I ran into 3 students who were going to enter the bathroom. But I stopped them and told them not to come in because a young man had gotten in there, and I was going to ask for help to get him out of there. The girls waited for me at the entrance, and I went for a teacher so he could support me. But I was barely halfway across the field when one of these students yelled at me, "Teacher, there's no one here." I went back to the bathroom, and the 3 young women were there inside. They told me that one of them had come in as soon as I left, and that all the bathroom doors were open and there was not a single person inside. At first, I thought that they were covering up for him because they knew that he would receive a punishment for entering the women's bathroom. But no, they were not very sure. In addition to the fact that I only left seconds before they yelled at them, they asked me if I was sure that there was someone in the bathroom. I answered that yes, it was a young man who was crying. I was more than sure about that. One of them turned to look at her classmates and said, "Aaron." The girls laughed nervously and said, "How do you think?" I asked them who they were talking about, and one of them told me that they had a classmate who was a man, but about 3 months had removed life. I didn't want to ask them more details. I just told them to go to their classroom because the bell had already rung, but they left me too uneasy with what they told me. All day I spent thinking about that young man. I could barely give my classes. I was too uneasy. I felt something inexplicable in my chest. At the time of the students leaving, I stayed an extra hour because I was reviewing work that I had assigned them, and my husband told me that it would take him a while to come by for me because they were busy at work. So I took the opportunity to get mine done early. There were still people in the school, mostly teachers and the 2 superintendents, but little by little it was emptying. Time passed and my husband was already on his way, and I was putting my things away, but suddenly I heard how a bench moved. I turned suddenly and saw the same young man sitting all the way in a bench. My heart was beating very fast. I stared at him without being able to say anything. Then I screamed when a teacher spoke to me from outside because I was very scared. He knocked on the door that was open and asked me, "Sorry for having scared me." He just wanted to ask me if I needed a ride, but I told him no, that my husband was already on the way, and I thanked him. Then I turned around again, and the boy was no longer at the desk. Suddenly, he grew out of nowhere. The teacher saw my terrified face. He looked out and asked me what was happening. I took my things and went talking to him, and I couldn't help but ask him about that boy that the students told me about who ended his life, and he told me everything. He told me that he studied in that grade that I was teaching, that he was a very quiet boy and he didn't have friends. He was almost always alone, but that he didn't know that he suffered from any psychological illness. That's why he never offered him help, which he regretted, but that it was true. His parents found him hanged in his house one night, and they notified the school days later. In fact, at school, they had made a small tribute to him with flowers and those things, but that in reality, he hadn't left any friends at that school. That's why everything was as if nothing happened. It made me very sad hearing that, but I couldn't help but ask him how he was physically, and he described to me the young man that I had been seeing since I entered. Brown hair, light eyes, thin and very tall. There was no one else with those characteristics in that high school. I went to my house with a lump in my throat because more than feeling fear, I asked myself why he manifested himself to me. What was it that he wanted to tell me? And because no one else noticed his presence, talking to him, his soul had stayed in the halls of that school. But I asked him then why no one else noticed him, and he told me that maybe because no one ever noticed him, not even when he was alive, and since I was new, that's why he manifested himself to me. The only thing I know is that with time, I stopped seeing him. I never said anything to any colleague there. I didn't want them to think I was crazy or a liar. I preferred to save myself that and just keep quiet and respect him in the few times that I saw him again. But I never said anything. Now I no longer work at that school, but I wonder if that poor boy will still be there or if he could transcend. I hope it's true that he is finally at peace wherever he is. My name is Raphael, and I have been a math teacher for 19 years. I had always considered myself a skeptical person who only believes in what was scientifically proven. But after what happened to me and my colleagues at that school, I changed my way of thinking. You have heard that thing about until you see it, you won't believe it. That was what happened to me. I started to work in a school that was on the outskirts of the city. It was a high school, and I taught there in the afternoon shift. The place had 3 buildings. Well, before there was the city's psychiatric hospital, but it had been closed for more than 8 years, and they had restored it to make it a school. I remember the first time I saw something strange in the place. It was an afternoon that was already dark because it was winter time, and it got dark very early. It was also very cold. I left the classroom towards Building 2 to ask the secretary for the list of assistants. But before entering the building, I felt something that made me look up towards Building 3, which was unoccupied. Well, it was only used for workshops, and it was not the schedule of any, but in the window above there was an elderly lady who was looking down. I could not see her well because where she was, the lights were off. I managed to see her thanks to the lights of the patio that illuminated those windows, but it seemed very strange to me because I had never seen that woman. She was not a teacher, and I did not know how she had arrived. Those rooms closed with a key because there is material inside. I entered the office and told my secretary that I had seen this person on the 3rd floor of Building 3. She found it as strange as me because there was no one there, and as I mentioned, the doors were always locked. She told me not to worry. She was going to send the mayor to check. Well, I had to leave to start my class, but when I left, there was no one at that window. I finished giving my classes that night, and when I was leaving, I got dirty too. She caught up with me and told me that the mayor had told her that he didn't find anyone in Building 3, and that he also checked all the doors and they all had keys. I was very embarrassed, but she told me not to worry and not to tell anyone, but that she also sometimes heard or saw things at her workplace. She said that sometimes she had to stay until very late alone in the office, and that they moved things around the place. She also told me that one time she heard someone screaming in the bathroom that was outside her office. She thought that maybe it was some student that had stayed late, and she went to see what was wrong, but when she entered the bathrooms, there was no one there. She says that she told the coordinator, but she didn't believe her. Then she told me, laughing sarcastically, it's obvious that she doesn't believe me because she only comes a few hours a day and she leaves. I'm the one that stays here very late. Honestly, I was somewhat incredulous, but I didn't make her feel uncomfortable. So I just told her, take care of yourself, Suzy. Try not to stay alone until late. Then we said goodbye, and each of us retired to our cars. A few days passed, and I was in the men's bathroom when I heard someone laughing out loud outside the bathroom stalls. But a very ugly laugh that stung not the skin because it was not from a young man, but like an old man, but in a very creepy way. I opened the bathroom door and went to wash my hands, and of course, there was no one there. Then a colleague of mine came in, a very young teacher who also teaches classes there. He asked me why I had such a strange face, and I answered that they wanted to scare me, that I had heard the laughter of an old man, but that maybe it had been some student making that voice. He did not laugh as I expected and answered me, "Here, very strange things happen. You are not the only one that things like this have happened to. It seems that the crazy ones are still among us." I told him not to tell them, yes, because I had to respect them. Obviously, he was referring to the people who were admitted to that psychiatric hospital. Later, I told him that I did not believe in those things, and he only answered, "Well, it's good that you don't believe like that. They will not be able to scare you," and there the talk ended. Hours later, I was giving my class when suddenly two students asked me if they could come in. I had already been in class for 20 minutes, so I was not going to let them in, but they were accompanied by the janitor who asked me to leave for a moment. It turns out that the boys stayed longer in a classroom in Building 3 while they were collecting their things, and they say that suddenly the door closed very loudly by itself, and when they tried to open it, they couldn't. Someone had locked them in from the outside, and nobody had the keys to be able to do it other than the janitor, and obviously he had not been the janitor. He told me that he heard them screaming and knocking on the door when he was going to that building to clean, and that was when he realized that the young people were locked in there, so he opened it. They had no logical explanation for that. He only asked me to let them into my class because it had been an accident. I let them in, but that was already giving me a little fear. It seemed that really that place had entities or strange things, and how not if it is said that many things happened there, horrible while it was working, that hospital. Another afternoon, a student came out of the bathroom running and screaming. It was a break, and some teachers and I were outside. We went to help her and see what had happened to her, and she was with her face terrified. She said she was in the bathroom and she saw under the door some bare feet that looked like an old woman. She began to scream, and when she pulled up her clothes, her feet were gone. She ran out because she was very scared. Nobody said anything to her, only a teacher who hugged her and told her that it had already happened, taking her to another place to talk to her. While the other teachers and I stayed talking, and that was when I realized that strange things had happened to all of us who were there on campus, and that was no longer a coincidence. Really, in that place, it was full of strange entities that perhaps did not want us to be there, where for many years was their home. That is how I finished that semester, and then they changed my campus. Years later, I found out that that high school had moved to another building in a central area of the city for unknown reasons, but I think that all of us who worked there knew the real reason because it was impossible to continue in such a hostile environment as that. The students could not concentrate. Well, unusual things always happened, and now those buildings are abandoned again. I wonder if someone will use them again in the future and how long they will endure. I would like to tell you this story anonymously because I feel more comfortable. Although this experience has been around for some years, I would not like to have problems with the owners of that school for which I worked as a night watchman. As I already said, I watched over an elementary school at night from Monday to Saturday. For many, it may seem like a hard job, but the reality is that for me, it was not. In fact, I enjoyed it because I liked the silence and being alone. I took my radio and listened to music. I had to do my rounds and also be aware of the cameras. It was a private school, so they had cameras outside and also inside the school in all the classrooms and in some hallways. I had a dog named Gasper. I let train him from school so I could bring him in and have him help me in my work. I told them that he was very well trained and showing them that he listened to me in everything. I thought they would tell me no, but they gladly accepted because they said it would be easier for the dog to detect if any intruder wanted to get in, and that could be very helpful. In the first weeks that I started taking Gasper with me, everything went great. He kept me company and was always watching. But one night in particular, while Gasper and I were doing our rounds, he started to get very restless. He started to bark in a very upset way towards the door of a room. He never barked there unless he detected something, so I knew there was someone in there. I kept quiet, took the keys out of my pants, and opened the lock very slowly so that whoever was there wouldn't escape. But when I opened the door, I didn't see anyone. Although Gasper desperately entered the room, I was barking at him. Something, but I couldn't see here. I felt chills because I knew he was seeing something that I couldn't. He barked at him very angrily and never left his alert position. I yelled at him that we should leave, but he didn't get scared, which was very unusual. As I said, he was very well trained, but he was insistent, barking at nothing without even turning to look at me while I was talking to him. I had to go get him and pull him by the leash to get him out. It was very difficult for me to get him to go down the stairs, but suddenly he calmed down, and he was as if nothing had happened. I went to check the cameras looking for the recording of that particular room. I wanted to see if the cameras had captured something, and what I found in that recording was really very disturbing. In the recording, it showed that while we were walking down the hallway before reaching the room, something began to manifest itself on the camera. It was a male figure because he looked very tall and wide. He couldn't be seen very well on the night camera, and his face couldn't be seen. Only the silhouette appeared, and suddenly it vanished. But when Gasper began to bark, the figure reformed in the middle of the room and stayed there until I opened the door, and my dog ran in. This silhouette changed shape in a very strange way. First, it looked like a man, and then it ended up looking more like a child. The camera captured how my dog was somewhat withdrawn from that silhouette, as if he didn't want to get close to it. He was afraid of it. Animals are very perceptive. That's why I realized that that had to be something very evil for my dog to not want to even get close to it. That night, I decided not to enter the building. My dog became restless at times, that is to say, suddenly he would bark at the building with great anger and then calm down again. Of course, I showed those recordings to the owners, who turned a blind eye, saying that maybe it had been a fault with the camera. But they could never give me a reason why my dog would not stop barking at that supposed fault. They made me promise that I would not say absolutely anything about what had happened to anyone, and those recordings would be deleted. I preferred to resign, being honest. I no longer felt safe in that place at night, but I can't stop thinking that maybe that entity was always there while I was watching over the school. But it wasn't until I took my dog, Gasper, that he made me realize its existence. I don't know what that thing was, but it worries me that because there are children in those classrooms, maybe with something evil among them without anyone noticing. There is no doubt that there are being strangers around us right now. There could be one next to you wouldn't notice unless you have a pet that can see them.